Welcome to the next in our series of the state of the EVs in the UK interviews. There is some audio breakup on my side of this interview, but I think the rest of the content is superb and definitely very interesting to listen to. So on this recording, we're joined by the members of EVA Scotland. So does someone actually want to explain to me what the Electric Vehicle Association of Scotland actually is, how it's formed, and what you aim to do?
Maybe I can do that. Okay, well, we were formed in 2011 with 7 original members. We call them the Magnificent Seven. And if you look at our website, eva.scot, you'll find the story of how they formed. So we've been on the go since 2011. We've had a number of chairmen. I'm the current incumbent, if you like, in that role for my sins. Well, largely because no one else wanted to do it.
So do you want to just introduce yourself, Alastair?
Yeah, so my name's Alastair Hamilton, and I'm the chairman of EVA Scotland. And it's the other board members we have with us tonight. So Eleanor, Neil Swanson, Bob Smith, we all have different roles on the board. So we started in 2011. I wasn't involved then. I think, I don't know if even Neil Mack was way back then.
Yeah.
And we went through a number of chairmen, and even early on, we were getting a lot of, or the association was getting a lot of interest, in the media and stuff like that on television, with Adrian Loning, who's our original chairman. And we then kind of progressed and got to about 2017. And because of the work we were doing with Transport Scotland, who are an agency of government in Scotland, who were putting in or funding a lot of the charge points that were going in Scotland, they were very interested in obviously helping us to develop and progress. So they would provide accommodation for our meetings. They'd sometimes give us a, room for our AGM and a sandwich lunch on occasion. And we would, well, they would say to us, if you get properly constituted, we'll help you and give you some grant funding. So that was one of the things that Doug Robertson did in the last days, his last days as chair before I took over. Doug and I kind of worked together and with our other board members decided what form we were going to take. So we decided to become a community interest company. That seemed to be the most natural fit. And that happened around about the summer of 2017. And that allowed us to take on some grant funding from Transport Scotland, which we were obviously delighted to accept, and we've been in receipt of for a number of years. And that's just helped us do, the basic things, like get a brand identity, get some of the wording and the exhibit materials that you can see behind Neil Swanson there. That's some of our kind of branding. And get a bit more organized, essentially, and then go out and look a bit more professional when we did promotional events and the like. One of the things we put together was our membership pack, which was very early, which is quite well known and quite highly regarded in the community. So if you join EVA Scotland and you pay £15, then we'll send you out this membership pack, which has got a range of goodies. So it's eva.scot/join.
Good
so
plug. I like that.
what we're aiming to do though is a bit broader than that. And really when I took over chairmanship, that's kind of when we kind of broadened out to embrace the electrification of transport in general. So everything from an electric scooter through to an electric aeroplane. But obviously what we're most renowned for at the moment is our work with electric vehicles. So we do a lot of talking to government, talking to Transport Scotland, a lot of promotion, a lot of advocacy. And you probably know from, following Eleanor that she kind of gets everywhere, from Texas to New Zealand.
It's a hard life.
so that's, from our point of view, that's ideal. So it gets our brand beyond Scotland and out into the world. And that's really important because that brings back, well, we attract, first of all, so we attract companies, for example, who are interested in investing in Scotland in some way. So they come back through us and perhaps talk to, let's say, Transport Scotland or other agencies of government in order to promote what they are doing And obviously we won't take any Tom, Dick or Harry on as a corporate member, but if they've got something that we think is appropriate and good to offer, then you can get corporate membership through EVA Scotland. And we've got that's a growing thing at the moment. So one of our first, not the first, but one of our first corporate members was from France, interestingly enough. And that's because they were interested in the market that is Scotland, and how do they find out what's going on the ground. So they do that through us.
So I remember when I was talking to Elle last year, that one thing which really struck me was how different Scotland was to the rest of the UK in terms of how you'd got in the adoption of, like you mentioned, there's government funding for certain bits, which we haven't really seen in the rest of the UK. And obviously you've got the whole Charge Place Scotland thing up there, which is very different. So if I was to come and visit Scotland, what should I expect to see in terms of infrastructure, and can I actually use that?
Yes, you can. At the moment, you would use it using the Charge Your Car app and card. At the moment, they're tied together. We're expecting some changes in the next 7 months that may change how that works. But we've encouraged the Scottish Government to take on the idea of roaming, so that in theory, almost any card from any network through a back office like Girev as an e-mobility service provider will enable you just come up, rock up at certainly any of the Charge Place Scotland chargers, and it should just work.
So Charge Place Scotland, I remember that was free at one point, wasn't it? Or you just had to pay a membership fee and then the charges were free, but that's changed recently.
It's changing. So Charge Place Scotland is a brand rather than an actual network. Right. It's a service that's provided by the Scottish Government through Transport Scotland for charge point operators to have their facilities hosted on, mainly local authorities. So the unitary authorities, there are 32 in Scotland, have their networks on that. They're able to do what they like with them within that structure, so they can have different tariffs, different principles, and it really is something that one of the things we try and drive is to give some sort of universal variation of a tariff, which is not as easy as it sounds because they all have divergent ideas. It makes it challenging. Same everywhere.
So does that mean you've got a sort of a variety of different types of chargers as well on that network?
Yeah, so we have most of the usual suspects. We have ABB, we have eVolt, we have some Siemens FSEC in terms of the high-powered 50 kilowatt and up chargers, and down below that the typical 7 kilowatt, 22 kilowatt fast chargers. Again, it's a mix of eVolt, some ChargeMaster, and sundry other bits and pieces like Alphin have come in as well. It's interesting comparing the different manufacturers' penetration and capabilities in the market. ABB have developed a very poor reputation in Scotland because their maintenance turnaround period is measured with a calendar. And that's really unhelpful. I think they're increasingly aware that they have not done themselves any favours with that, and they're apparently improving, although the evidence is still to surface properly. There are still a number of units that just do not work. EVO having... Sorry, you go.
Sorry, I was just interrupting. But is that something you, as an organisation, would take on board, trying to persuade these manufacturers to be a bit more proactive?
So we've communicated with Siemens. Have been harder, but Siemens are very, very insular as a company. That's a whole other story for us. But ABB have responded. They've not been hugely informative. I think they have a focus that's south-centric. They don't really have an electric charging infrastructure, support infrastructure in Scotland in the north. So it's a long journey up to fix a single charger, which creates this problem where they actually have very good kit, but if you don't support it, it isn't worth anything. EVO have a large fleet. You'll have seen the EVO fleet everywhere, potentially. So they have their fleet of electric cars running around with service engineers, repairing the equipment as quickly as they can raise purchase orders from hosts. That's usually
as quick as you can tweet Bob Murphy.
Yeah, that's true. Which is very unfair on Bob. You shouldn't advertise him like that. I know he loves doing it, but he's got to have a day off sometime.
Well, I know a lot of my friends in the iPace forum know Bob as well, so support it.
I mean, Bob is incredibly committed, and it's very good. The way EVA work is a sort of class-leading example of how the infrastructure should work, and that's why I think of the 32 local authorities, I think it's about 27 use EVA as the principal supplier. There are political reasons why the other ones don't. It's nothing to do with the hardware, it's to do with how the contracts work and how the local authorities approach that type of contract more than anything else. But yeah, so it's a really interesting mix. And obviously we have all the other usual suspects in a gradually northward creeping line from Ingenie, Instavolt. You've already mentioned the electric highway, but that'll do. They're there and they're useful when they're there and they work. Yep. And we also have our own brand. Scottish Network for EV is just kicking off, much in the same vein as Ingenie, but with some fast chargers to provide the backup. And they are bought into the EVO network. They are running EVO equipment.
So one of the things that I get from iPace owners, particularly when in Scotland, is a perceived lack of ultra chargers, as in anything higher than 50 kilowatt.
It's a massively complicated question.
Yeah, I can understand that there are incredible challenges to get 100 kilowatt plus chargers in places.
But it's not just that. If you put just for the sake of it, if you take a sort of typical, we'll just settle very quickly on Ionity and 350 kilowatt chargers. 4 350 kilowatt chargers installed and commissioned in the ground is touching on 2.5 million typically.
Yeah.
Now, once you get out of the central belt of Scotland, there is no commercial drive that can support that. That will be a massive loft leader for 30 or 40 years, even if everyone drives an electric car that's capable of using it. 150, once you go rural, it's easy to generalize, but there are huge areas where even a 50 kilowatt charger is going to stretch local networks. So there are technologies coming with localized battery storage that will float that through, but that still brings you back to the original problem of more money.
Yeah.
So trunk routes, you won't see Transport Scotland funding, at least from the roads part, funding anything bigger than 50 kilowatts. Anything above 50 kilowatts will fall down to the commercial networks. And if they can't make money out of it, then you won't see it.
Okay. Which is fair enough.
That's commercial reality. It will come. They will appear in due course as the bigger fleets of cars come. But you end up with this interesting counterpoint where you can charge at home, obviously.
Yep.
So you've got a range of over 200 miles. And unless you're making a long journey, when would you use an ultra-fast charger?
Yep.
And that's just it. You've got longer range cars. You actually have less impetus to build the higher powered fleet of chargers, simply because the commercial reality doesn't work. We still need them to enable these journeys, but it's interesting it doesn't work. If you look at Germany at the moment, the German government has taken cognizance of that and has broadly adopted the Transport Scotland model. Here's the money. Rather than local authorities, for them it's private companies, but here's money, just go and build it and we'll fund it, loosely speaking.
Yeah, and they've got this mandate for petrol stations to have chargers built into them as well over the next few years as well.
We don't talk about the electrical challenges that it's not insurmountable, but the earthing of a charger in a petrol station is a more fun game than anywhere else.
Yeah,
you've got a TT network, and normally you say the charger can't be on it. It has to be TT, has to be in its own network, except in a petrol station where it has to be earthed at the main board for the petrol station.
If I could just jump in here, could I just jump in? You know, for people who are not aware of Neil Swanson's background, then he's a power engineer. And he works for one of the major energy networks in central Scotland. So,
I work at higher voltages than that.
Yeah.
But it's worth. I mean, that sort of knowledge is really, really useful. Especially, I can imagine for your committee, that's incredibly useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's also the sort of thing which doesn't actually reach drivers very often. They don't understand this stuff. They just think, why can't I have a charger? This, or why does it take so long for a charger to get connected? When we mentioned when we were off air talking before, we were mentioning the chargers near me at Necton, the in-stock chargers. They were in the ground for almost a year and a half before they were actually physically connected.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of expectation management that Neil does for us in terms of what's possible, the costs and the timescales, as you say. Yeah. Maybe I can just tell you a little story about the iPace and Bob Murphy and Neil Swanson and myself and the CEO of Jaguar Land Rover, Professor Dr. Rolf Speth.
Yep.
And this kind of is indicative of the way things work. I don't know if this is UK-wide, but certainly for us. So Neil Swanson and I were at the Nordic EV Summit, and Rolf Speth was giving a keynote address to a packed audience. And I took a photograph of him with a picture of the iPace on the screen in the background and tweeted it. And within about 30 seconds, Bob Murphy tweeted me, direct messaged me back and said, "Can you have a word with that guy and tell him that our chargers are not working with his cars because of his communication problems on the CCS connector." So at the end of his talk, Neil and I jumped up on stage and we didn't physically grab him, but we chatted to him, and he was very gracious. Actually, he said, "Oh, my secretary is Scottish. Let's talk about this and contact me, and we'll try and get this sorted out." So I think that just shows you the power of, the network of people.
And the big thing there was that EVO had been trying to get in contact with Jaguar to try and resolve this issue. It was just a CCS protocol interpretation issue that Jaguar had made an assumption that wasn't perfect, and it's messy. But Dr. Speth was we went up, "This is the problem, we need you to talk about it." And he said, "Yeah, they did say they had problems when they did the road test to prove it worked around the north of Scotland and they couldn't charge. But they've been ignoring the charger manufacturer getting in touch." So there are events that take place through NKL in the Netherlands Knowledge Database people, where you have charge festivals where people from the likes of Charan invite mainstream manufacturers to come along and test their products to actually work with a broad range of suppliers of chargers. It's a growing area, and it is one that when we were talking about CCS earlier, having obviously in Europe it's going to have a major stronghold. CHAdeMO isn't going to go away, but CCS within Europe will become very dominant. But there are loose aspects to the protocols that different interpretations can break the whole system for drivers. And that's something that rests almost wholly on the OEMs.
Yeah, I was once told by a charger manufacturer that CCS was a standard that wasn't really a standard. It was just so subject to interpretation. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that CHAdeMO has done well. Is it's obviously a Japanese standard, and it is absolutely set in stone. The only disappointment recently is CHAdeMO 3 coming out of China appears to have a completely different plug-in socket.
Yeah,
disappointing.
I think that is actually an interesting point as well. I mean, most of EVA Scotland supports both CHAdeMO and CCS, whereas in the UK we seem to be going to a lot of, especially the UK, England, Wales. There's a lot more CCS only chargers coming in. I know you have got a couple up in Scotland with the Ionity ones going in as well, but that does seem to be a direction which is going.
Well, you've got to look at who Ionity are. And Ionity is obviously entirely funded by the European OEMs who created the CCS standard. And that's absolutely fine, but you still have this broader market. I think we will continue, as the government in Scotland will continue to force people to support both standards and new chargers on the public network. On commercial networks, they can do what they want. But when you look at the likes of InstaVolt, they're supporting both DC standards. And I think they'll continue to do that for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. My Zoe driving friends would say it's a shame they don't do CAC as well. But
somebody pressed us about that and said, "Why don't you insist that all new rapid chargers have 43 kilowatts AC in Scotland? And the answer is because there are 67 43 kilowatt AC capable cars in Scotland.
Yep.
That's a lot of investment for a dwindling number of cars.
It is, and of course, Renault have gone CCS now as well. So that's
yeah. But having the 22 kilowatt outlet on the side of all the chargers, a couple of exceptions in East Lothian, obviously, but by and large, the units are coming with a 22 kilowatt outlet either integrated in the unit or fairly close by, which is going to suit the majority of the older Renault Zoe drivers. It just won't be on a unit that's marked as a journey charger or rapid charger. But again, as Alastair was saying, managing expectations is key. Getting people to understand what they want, what they need, and what will be available will probably never quite line up.
Another thing which you mentioned again off air was this whole communication issue, which is a challenge, and it's challenging in England. Yet alone, I can imagine in some of the highlands, the bylands of Scotland, it must be a real challenge to get communication, especially when you're relying on mobile networks.
Yeah, I know, definitely. It's just when we've been talking about kind of rapid chargers and everything like that, and as my t-shirt says, range anxiety. A big part of it now, the batteries and everything are getting bigger, that it's more often it's the charger that's going to cause the anxiety. But the likes of in Scotland, the main spine of Scotland is a road called the A9 that Transport Scotland have been encouraging and installing charging hubs up and down the A9, and again, EVA Scotland have had a big part in helping advise with that as well, the kind of hub format and where to locate the chargers, so you do have that reliability. But as I say, it's just if you've got the single unit tucked behind a nice mountain somewhere and you're out of comms, and I have been caught out myself, and before leaving the previous charger I'd checked that it was online, and well, Bob's doing well out of this. I did contact him saying if he could do anything from the back office. I think he needs to be made an honorary director at this point. But there was nothing they could do. I managed to limp to the next charger, but I did then miss my ferry connection I planned later on, so it's still an issue.
So the communications problems, though, have two distinct, at least, parts. The obvious one is the loss of cellular comms, but the big one is what happens at the charger when that happens. OCPP, the Open Charge Point Protocol, has a couple of options. The whitelist is one that's used by a lot of manufacturers where all your active cards are on it. The advantage there rests entirely within the network. Once you bring in roaming, that's great for people who use the local network, but terrible for example, if you were up, Gary, using one of your cards, it'd be no help at all to you whatsoever the first time you visited the charger. The protocol also allows for it to just assume that you're authorized, log the details of the transaction, and send it when comms come back up. In many ways, that one's a lot more attractive because from the user's point of view, it doesn't go through the sequences of addressing the whitelist, it just works. If it can see the back office, it'll work through that. And if not, it will cache the session for transmittal when the comms come back up. Power outages, different problem, hard to fix.
You're much harder. So in England, there's a huge drive for contactless payment. Is that the same in Scotland?
Yes. So all new grant-funded chargers on the public network have to have contactless payment as well as RFID or app control. There are not concerns. There are things to be aware of with contactless payment. Obviously, when you go up, it puts a freeze on a certain amount of money in your bank account, which is not necessarily a fair and equitable way to do it. There are some people out there who drive EVs or on lower incomes, and having a long journey of £425 freezes on the account will put them on the verge of overdraft. So contactless is great for people who want the convenience of you coming up. You can just tap in with contactless. For a lot of other people, and company car drivers in particular, that is not going to be a convenient way to do it. It generates a lot of effort. So you still need something like the RFID card or the app or obviously plug and charge will
Yeah,
come
I'm
as
a
well.
great fan of plug and charge.
Yeah, it will come. The protocol was changed for the standard. 61851 was changed so that there is a little serial comms port at the front, whether you're on CCS CHAdeMO, but also an AC. That is something that's going to come in fairly short order. There are products gradually coming to market that will do that. There's not that many cars yet that will do it, but they're there, and it will come. CCS is going to be a little sharper off the mark than CHAdeMO in this, just simply because of the nature of the protocols. But yeah, contactless is there, and it's a quick fix to get you mobile, keep you going. But I think what we'll see is that there'll be tiered versions. We already see in the likes of Polar, pay by contactless, it's a higher price than if you have the card, which is a higher price in turn than if you had the subscription. And that's going to be an interesting marketplace to see how it does finally evolve. But what we're encouraging the local councils to do is support all of it.
Which makes sense. So in terms of, you mentioned hubs, and I love your hubs. I think that they're such a great
My own
idea.
personal hubs, thank you.
Your own personal else hubs, yeah. But I mean, they're just the whole. I've been ranting on about chargers for the last few months in my videos, and one of the things I've been sort of talking about is the fact that they need to be easy to use and they need to be more convenient. But why do we always have to get wet when we're charging? And I think the fact your hubs, most of your hubs have got some form of cover is just a great, I think. And I think also, I've talked to a couple of service engineers, and they've said that having exposed charges in the rain, it makes their life incredibly difficult, especially if they've got to do repairs in the rain. It's virtually impossible. So I think that's a fantastic idea. But also the point you rightly made about actually having more than one charger on site. Because I mean, in England, obviously, we've mentioned electricity, but usually if you go to a services, unless you're happy to be lucky in one of the ones, if you've got a CCS-based car, you've got one charger maximum of those services. And if it's actually working, it's highly unlikely. So I think that from my point of view, hubs are fantastic. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, Dundee, we obviously discussed last year, El. That's have you got another hub going in there?
Well, we've got a different type of hub. There's one already, and we've got our 3 rapid charging hubs strategically placed round about the city, that as well as having the rapid chargers, there are type 2 fast chargers as well. The hub that I use the most at Princess Street's the one that that one and the one in Broughty Ferry, which is the next town just up from Dundee, have the solar canopies. But at the Princess Street one, they also have their battery storage. So that's the kind of the jewel in the crown of the 3, and the others have potential for that to go in. But as well as the rapid charging hubs, Dundee are putting in, and they've one up and running already, and one that I think the COVID situation has slowed down the progress a little bit, of hubs within the multi-storey car parks in Dundee. In Dundee at the moment, as 100% EV driver, if you register your number plate with the council, they put it on their system as if it's almost one of their fleet cars. So when you drive up to the multi-storey, the camera reads your number plate and the barrier opens, and you can then park for free. As a benefit to encourage low emissions vehicles into the city centre. But on the top floor, trying to remember how many charging points there actually are, they've kind of commandeered a level that's all charging points under solar hubs. But you are charging to charge when you're there, but your parking is free. But there's no time limit on how long you can park there for. So their model is that the commuters come into the city, again, as I said, encouraging the zero emissions vehicles in, and the commuters can come and park there during the day, and hopefully charge on Dundee Sunshine in progress. And then when the commuters leave, the local residents could then come in and park their cars and charge overnight. And again, with the battery storage, if all the solar's not been used, that would come into it. So they've put that in one of the main car parks down near the science centre, in Dundee, but there's another one just to the other side of the town that is a work in progress. And talking, hinting back to what we were talking about earlier, it's been a really good working relationship between eVolt and there's a family business that has just grown and grown in the EV market is Boyd Brothers, and that pairing of the two the formulas of these hubs is just fantastic, and they're just a dream to use and have access to, because a big part of my story as an EV driver has been not having a home charger and still being able to easily drive my shorter range Gen 1 Leaf. So it just shows when the infrastructure's there, it's perfectly.
I'd say that's a great story, and it actually, I must admit, your story inspired me, because I haven't got home charging, so I knew I could do it because I'd seen what you could do. Obviously, I don't have the benefit of your hubs, so we do have some charging in the car parks at Peterborough, but not as much as you've got. So that would be lovely to see that, and I think it would definitely encourage a few more drivers.
Can I just say that EVA Scotland are a member of EVA, which is the European Association for Electric Mobility. And when we first joined, I was our delegate to go to the directors meeting, or the board meeting of EVA, and they were looking for nominations for the E-Visionary Award, the city that they should give the E-Visionary Award in Europe to. And this is as part of one of their big conferences. They award this to a city in Europe, a city in Asia, and a city in the Americas. So I kind of sat there for about 2 nanoseconds and thought, well, Dundee. So we nominated Dundee, and there's stiff competitions from other major European cities, but Dundee actually won that year. In 2018, they won the E-Visionary Award for Europe, and that was presented, I think, Mr. Beaton from Urban Foresight picked it up. David Beaton from Urban Foresight picked it up for all the hard work they had done as part of that story in Dundee. And that was presented in Kobe in Japan.
Yeah, and it was this time last year, almost to the date, that after maybe just a couple of tweets to Fully Charged, we managed to get them to come through and film an episode in Dundee, and we did a panel session with Robert hosting, with myself, Justin Mayer of eVolt, and David Beaton of Urban Foresight, and Dee West of ChargeNet New Zealand. So I still can't believe they came, but yeah, it was just nice that popped up on my timeline that was just over a year ago.
It's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
I think Dundee is definitely a shining light for all cities should be looking at to see how they can move forward on this. And
our claim to fame that Robert Llewellyn is one of our honorary members.
Hey. That's a good honorary member to have. So, in terms of what you've learned in Scotland relative to perhaps the rest of the UK, what lessons could we learn? I know I was talking to Jill Knoll about EVA England the other day, which is obviously something you've helped set up. What would you like to say to them that they should be looking at doing or trying to improve? What lessons have you learned?
Well, over the years, EVA Scotland has had a number of approaches from people, particularly in England, wanting to set up an association. I can think of at least 3 or 4 in the last couple of years since I've been chair. And more often than not, these have kind of fallen by the wayside. I think because it's quite a large job. But earlier this year, I think it was around about, or end of last year, I was contacted by Alan Cooklan, who had the same idea. And speaking to Alan, we had a telephone conversation, and it was clear that Alan, had the bit between his teeth, and was a guy who was going to make this happen, So what I tried to do was put all these people who had contacted me previously onto Alan so that he could try and form a bigger grouping. And I think that was very successful. Yeah. So we obviously know that Jill is involved, and Bridget Phelps, the chair of EVA in England. So I had a lot of conversations with that group, Dan Brown from REA, someone from Sussex EVs. I think it's Wayne, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, from Sussex EVs. Sorry if I've missed anyone out.
I think that's everybody.
No, I've missed one or two. So we had a few kind of Zoom calls, and just talked a bit about our experience. They were very keen to understand why we'd chosen the model that we had chosen, and why not EVA UK, for example, which is a very good question. And that really boils down to where the responsibility for transport lies in the different countries. So transport is a devolved issue in Scotland. So we are much better talking to the Scottish Government for most things like the Charge Pay Scotland network and some of the incentives which are unique to Scotland. But obviously there are other things that impact us from the UK level. And the same would apply in England and in Wales and Northern Ireland. So it makes sense to have these kind of distinctive, as I said to them, you need people on the ground where the Parliament is so that they can go and knock on doors, basically. So that was really why, I guess, EVA England formed in the way they did. I mean, obviously they got a bunch of energy and a whole lot of enthusiasm and a really great looking board. I think
really good contacts on that board. I think that they're going to be able to get their foot through the door better than perhaps some other people who've tried this in the past. So I think that's absolutely.
The other aspect of your question, though, Gary, was what do you need to do something similar? And really, the councils and local authorities, as well as the private investors, they don't necessarily have to work quite hand in hand, but there has to be a degree of coordination. One of the things that's worked up here is the traditional, if you build it, they will come. You build this massive network. It may have weaknesses, as Els pointed out, where single chargers can present huge challenges. But people are coming up to drive around it, not just from the south of Scotland to the north, but all the way from the Netherlands, Germany, France, are coming across here to travel. Even Costa Rica, Monica Araya came across here just to rent a Jaguar and drive around the northwest of Scotland. So it can become a tourist attraction as well, particularly draws in eco-tourists. So seeing it as not just providing a service, but potentially providing an impetus for local economies, even more so now after the challenges of COVID, getting people back who are more aware of the need to be environmentally friendly as they travel. But for that to work, you need a big enough infrastructure. And I think the big thing is to be brave. Elmed brought up D West from ChargeNet NZ, and on our webinar on tariffs a couple of weeks ago, James Cousins from ChargeNet NZ, New Zealand is almost unique in the world because their charge network was built by one family. Dee and her husband Steve built the network from the ground up because they got a Tesla and they wanted to be able to drive it places. So they actually built a double island wide network to do so. So there is an element of bravery required, and it will take a while to see a return. But the returns can't just be measured for governments or local authorities in the financial terms of how much money are we making from it. We would encourage them at this point to target breaking even in the infrastructure. It's grant funded, but your operating costs must be met. That's a key point at the moment. But the benefits that are applying to society with cleaner air, I know up in Dundee, the big part from the first hub at Lochee, it wasn't about just letting people charge, it was letting the taxis, which tended to congregate there, become electric because the geography of Dundee has got this beautiful bowl effect so that all the noxious fumes collected at the bottom. So Dundee put some of their funding for clean air into the EV infrastructure. Fraser does talk about this at length, and he is right because he can be very proud of what he's achieved there in terms of cleaning up the atmosphere. It was measurable. How many years, El? It wasn't many.
Oh, Fraser would keep me right. Need to ask. That's Fraser Crichton of Dundee City Council, who's in the Dundee episode of Fully Charged. Robert interviews him quite a lot. But something that Neil mentioned with the taxi drivers. One thing I think with EVs, it's when it has an impact on your back pocket and your wallet, and obviously that was a massive driver for our taxi drivers, and even things like when they have to renew their license, that it was, I think, £10 cheaper or something if it's an electric one, and that got all the taxi drivers talking, and that if it's a new private hire it has to be electric. Different things that they brought in, but we're very fortunate to have the incentives that we do up here. Bob's our money man. He might be able to talk about them a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also worth mentioning when we talk about Dundee taxis, the first Dundee hub, of course, wasn't run by the council.
Yeah.
So the late Davy Young. Yeah, sorry, on you go.
No, carry on.
Oh, you lived there, I didn't.
Yes, the first hub was at the main taxi rank, as Neil said. Was kind of pioneered by Davy. I think it was his grandchildren that had made some comment about not wanting to get in the dirty diesel car, and that just triggered him to look into the model of electric taxis. And I said it wasn't something that the city council had put in, it was something that they had sought themselves, and it was quite unique at the time to see 5 rapid chargers side by side.
Yeah.
In one place, and the public at that point could use it, and they still can, but with the other hubs it's kind of discouraged now. But that was there, and it was 10 minutes from my flat, which was great.
It worked out really well for you. So we talked about incentives there just briefly, and I know Scotland's got different incentives to most of the rest of the UK. So could we sort of just cover a little bit of what you've got different up there?
Bob, money.
Bob's the money man.
Well, I'm certainly the money man for EVA Scotland. As for the incentives, obviously, I think the biggest incentive, certainly for the early part and the early adopters, has been many years of free charging, as well as in a lot of places free parking as well. Obviously, as certain other incentives come along, where you found the likes of plug-in hybrids getting the same like benefit in kind rates as a full electric car. You tend to find in the city centre areas the on-street chargers were getting, permanently blocked all day, because the early days the councils didn't really know what was probably the best way to go about it. So there was no time limit on it. Then I suppose the other side of that was the local traffic wardens probably couldn't tell the difference between a full battery electric vehicle, a plug-in hybrid, or whether it was an ICE vehicle, because to them it's just a car sitting in a space, and whether there was a cable. And I remember one time in Glasgow, there was actually a Peugeot sitting in front of me, and somebody had actually got quite smart, and they actually had an electric cable sitting just inside the flap of their petrol cap, just so that they could use that spot. And I think it was probably because it was outside their office. Absolutely crazy idea, but anyway, so things have moved on, and the council sort of started changing their ways of thinking, and you would find that you would still get a free charge, but you had to pay for parking. Other ones, it was multi-storey, but you could pay for parking, and obviously again you would get the parking for free, charging for free, and I think it's obviously been partially covered as well. Different councils obviously set their own tariffs, but they also set their own rules, and they set their own rules for how long you can stay, the guidelines for charging. So it kind of, we've always tried to encourage the councils to try and adopt a kind of central idea. And some have taken that on, others decided other ways. And I think it's there's obviously a lot of councils out there that are very proactive. One of the other major benefits and incentives is an interest-free loan that's run by the Energy Saving Trust for Scotland. And that enables you to buy, for a private vehicle, an electric vehicle up to £35,000. And obviously there's a process to go through that. Been through that ourselves, myself and my wife, in our current car. Yeah, I mean, and the difference in payments between that and one where you're actually paying like interest on a PCP or a bank loan makes a massive difference in the monthly payments if you're going down that road for buying a car.
That sounds a brilliant incentive, I have to say. That's just something I could
it's your car at the end of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, that also feeds back into the second-hand market as well.
Yeah.
Because you're not paying a discounted price for the car, you're just getting a very good finance package. But these cars are coming around, they're hitting the second-hand market, and that's something that I think, I know that it's something that's mentioned a lot on the forums and on Twitter. I know Ewan's mentioned it more than a couple of times recently. Buy a new EV, which is the best new EV, or just buy a second-hand one, because there are cars out there that will meet your day-to-day needs, whether it's a 24 kilowatt-hour Leaf or something a little bigger, depending on your particular needs. And
other incentives that are available, there's like interest-free loans for buying an e-bike, and e-cargo bikes as well for businesses. There's interest-free loans for those as well. I think for individuals, I think it's 3,000 or 3,500 for an individual for one bike. I think you can get up to 2 for a household as a whole. There's also for the home chargers as well. So if you don't manage to get one through like the dealership, again through Energy Saving Trust, the OLEV grant I think is £500 towards it, and the Scottish Government or Energy Saving Trust top that up by I think it's another 300. So and that's been going for certainly since I got a first car back in 2013. So it's proved great for me. So
it does sound like you've got some very good targeted incentives, which I could see working throughout the rest of the UK a bit better.
We would love to see a lot more, though.
And I would
love
say,
to see it extended nationwide.
I would say that you've got to realise that the framework in Scotland is different. I know there's a consultation going on at the moment at kind of UK level about the date for no more petrol or diesel cars or vans. The date in Scotland is 2032 at the moment. I mean, I suspect that, if the rest of the UK budges, I suspect Scotland might budge too. And we'd certainly be trying to push that date into the 2020s, which is what we do when we meet privately, with the either Scottish Government ministers or Transport Scotland. We'd be trying to pull that date into the 2020s for Scotland. So that 2032 target, you've got to work out, if you're going to lose all political credibility if you're not able to meet it.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And I don't think the incentives are quite enough yet. I think if you look at other countries like Norway, who are selling over 50% of new cars are battery electric, and they are getting rid of the sales tax and the VAT, and that's just bringing costs down. So pure, economics there kind of. It's going to be cheaper.
I think economics are always going to be a driving force in this. I mean, the thing I always get said to me is and this was particularly noticeable when people talk about the MG ZS, which is obviously one of the cheapest EVs out there, but people still couldn't work out why it was so much more expensive than the petrol version of it. The sort of 5k difference in between, and I often get that pushed back to me that I won't buy an EV until it's the same price as the equivalent petrol car.
Well, the answer there is possibly to force the price of the petrol car up.
Yep.
That may not be popular, but it's one way of achieving that parity, because you've got to look at it in terms of where the damage is being caused, where the waste is, because once you've burnt that fuel, you don't get it back. That's just the end of the game. So is it something that we need to perhaps step back and review? That's probably a bit more extreme than politicians would like to jump onto at the moment, but we have to look at what we're achieving and the timescales as we need to achieve it in. So it's not going to be popular. I think that's just something that we have to accept for politicians. And sometimes they will have to do things that will not make them or as popular as they'd like to be.
Like the sugar tax for cars.
Well, yeah, or minimum drink pricing.
Yeah, ruined our brew though.
I would say that, if you go outside of the UK and listen to debates in other countries, that's very educational. So I was on a webinar with Christina Boo from the Norwegian Association. It was a Plug in America webinar a week or two ago. And she was talking about the 2040 date. And I've heard her do this before. She just laughs at the 2040 date. She says there will be no more oil. You do not have to do anything. There will be no more oil. And I think that's,
Yeah. It's when you look beyond that, I know that some of you may have read the Ofgem output recently on trying to force the networks to go green. I've not read it in detail, only headline acts, and all the usual things happen when it's announced, and then give it a year and see what happens. But to support electrification of vehicles in the UK, we know the national grid can cope. What we are fairly comfortable with is that the low voltage networks, not so much. So hence the change from OLEV for smart charging. And we need that to control it, to keep the grid going, to keep the lights on. And when we have the low carbon technologies kicking in heat, there's an argument that says possibly people have learned under COVID that moving over to active travel, using the electric bike, hopefully getting back in public transport afterwards, actually that's going to help offset the issue of having a complete changeover to electric cars and the draw they'll create on the grid, because people might not necessarily drive the car as often or have such a big car, or indeed own a car. They may go down the shared ownership route. These are all things that have got to play into the mix for the transition. And it's, again, a difficult thing to push forward. The early models of shared ownership have been challenging. Anyone use Car2Go? It was very good, but it's not quite taken off. But incredibly, the OEMs quite like it. The argument loosely goes, why sell a car once when you can sell it 15 times and then again at the end? You're going to sell it hundreds of times over the course of 3 or 4 years it's in service. And then it still has residual and you can sell it to people who want to buy a car to keep. But again, that just helps reduce the number of vehicles on the road. As Elle says with the hub at the top of the car park, that isn't just letting commuters come in, park off street, as Elle pointed out, and then people who live nearby, their cars are going up there to charge overnight. So they've got a load control facility to let them have minimum impact on the grid. Plus that's another 26 or 28 cars that aren't on the streets. And that model can be looked at in Oslo as well with the Vulcan unit, where it's a commercial premise through the day with people parking and charging. And then effectively the Oslo City Council rents it in the evenings for residents to go and park. And it's 200 charge points there. And from their point of view, that's the streets handed back to pedestrians, because that's 200 cars that are out of sight, that aren't in anyone's way anymore, which creates the nice open feel in the city that personally I want, and I know Dundee has, and Edinburgh can have, and Glasgow and places.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's such an important innovation. One, I was talking to a city in England a couple of weeks ago. I can't actually name them because they haven't actually announced anything yet, but they were talking about a charge and ride scheme for their city. So basically putting a massive number of chargers out in what would have been a park and ride, but turning it into a charge and ride. And I think that's a great idea as well.
Yeah, so are you up? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I know I keep blowing the Dundee trumpet, but as I mentioned, the charging hub in Broughty Ferry, as I said, the town just a couple of miles outside of Dundee. They're trying to encourage across Dundee, but this hub ties into it a lot, is this multimodal transport that to stop people coming right into the city centre, because there's a bypass that goes up that way that connects the next towns up, Carnoustie, Arbroath and beyond. You can take that road all the way up to Aberdeen, that people would come down in their electric cars, plug in at Broughty Ferry, and either the last mile, they've put a lovely path right along the shorefront that's walkable. They're going to be putting in e-bikes that you can hire, or you can hop on the train. at Rottiferry and into Dundee. So there's all these different ways. So even though they're electric cars, just trying to reduce the congestion into the city centre. And they're also looking at, again, towards where my flat was in Dundee, there's a high school there, Morgan Academy, and I think they were looking at putting chargers in there that, again, residents overnight could use, just to reduce the number of vehicles sitting parked and things as well, just trying really to get as much off the streets as much as they can.
Yeah, and as you rightly say, declogging the streets makes the other forms of transport much more attractive, walking, cycling.
Yeah. I don't know, Gary, if you've ever read about Pontevedra in Spain.
It rings a bell, but I can't think why.
So Pontevedra, the mayor in Pontevedra made a politically independent decision and banned cars from the medieval centre of his city completely. You're allowed one car for a wedding and one car for a funeral, and that's your lot. All the signposting in the city centre is walking distance in minutes. You can cycle, you can take your little kick scooter, or you can walk. And when he did it, he got a lot of kickback from the local business community objecting to things. Obviously, there are still deliveries permitted at certain hours of the early morning, late evening, when there are some roads let them bring in, and then they have to drive it along the streets and alternate means. But the businesses said, it's a disaster, it's terrible. It's one of the most economically successful city centres in Spain, because people walk and they go into the shops and they spend money. And because they're passing, they go places they certainly wouldn't go in a car. So I know we see a lot in the UK of people objecting to cycle routes, obstructing access to shops for parking. Do you know, that isn't as bad a thing as people think, because if you can get people out their cars and interacting with the local economy, that's a win. And then that goes back to something Elle was saying earlier about the electric A9. The Scottish Government's philosophy, and one that we wholly support, is travelling along a highway, the electric A9. It isn't just about you're travelling, you charge, you disappear. Part of that is come off, possibly have the hub at the side of the road, but with walking or cycling access into the local town or community, where you plug in your car to charge, and as long as you're not in a hurry, having a range of chargers gives you the option. You'll pay less for lower power. Go and rent a bike, ride into town, explore one of the attractions, have a cup of coffee, a can of Coke, Mars bar, whatever, deep fried or not, and come back. Because that actually supports the local economy, which means that the local council is getting an income stream from that will help subsidise the chargers to maintain the cost of electricity at a lower level, which means people will stop and spend more in the local economy, and it becomes fully circular. And I think that's something a lot of the big networks in the UK, they have no vested interest in that. That's reasonable, but that's why it's incumbent on the local authorities to engage in this, because at the end of the day, it's their community they're supporting by installing this equipment. It's not about making money from drivers. It is about supporting local economies, and it will all pay off in the long run between the clean air and open shops.
Brilliant. I think that's a great place to leave this discussion, because it's been fantastic. I thank you so much for joining me on this, because it's really informative. We're going to have to split this into 2 episodes, but I'm sure that people will want to listen to it anyway. It's been really, really good. So thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Could I just say that we've got another 2 people who are not here tonight. Yep. So Neil McLennan, who's our kind of IT guy, and is the developer behind the WhatsApp app, which is a wonderful ED resource.
Use it almost every day.
Good, glad to hear it. And Laura Robinson, who's our administrator and researcher, who's not here tonight either. So we are a bigger team.
Well, thanks to everybody involved, because it's been, as I say, it's been brilliant, and Laura did actually help set this up. So
she did indeed, yes.
Very happy to thank her for that as well. So we will have to follow this. Get back to you again. Probably I do one of these every year, so I think we'll if we can, we'll do a follow up next year and see how we've all got on there.
Well,
But
hopefully
again,
see you in person
yeah,
as well. That'd be
let's hope so. Let's hope so. And I will. Hopefully, I'll get up to Scotland again because I really want to.
Yeah.
So maybe come visit that
Yeah,
Dundee hub. And
let us know when you're coming.
I will. I will
And
indeed.
I'm looking forward to getting to the beaches in Norfolk like I did when I was a
Yes.
a
Well,
youngster.
maybe I'll meet you at that Instavolt at Nexon.
Necton, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did recording it. Yeah, fantastic interview there with EVA Scotland people, and let's catch up with them again next year and see how they progress. But yeah, very interesting. Hope you enjoyed that. Please like, please subscribe. It helps grow the channel.